Asalaamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak, my brothers and sisters. How are y'all doing? How is fasting going? Please go ahead, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear all about it. So today we are back with another reaction video, and that is on Khalid Ibn Al Walid in the Battle of Yarmouk. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So I know one of my last videos, it was about Islam's mightiest dynasty, which was the Abbasid Caliphate, and I expressed how intrigued I am about learning about Islam's history and everything like that, Islamic warriors. So Khalid Ibn Walid was suggested in, I think, the last video. I don't know anything about this guy, but I'm super excited to learn all about the warriors of Allah and warriors of Islam, inshallah. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
حي على الفلاح. Khalid ibn Walid, the sword of Allah, destroyer of two empires and undefeated general. A man who was dismissed from command for drawing too close to divinity himself. He was a leader who never lost a single expedition during his life, and who led Muslims in many battles to the farthest east and west. He fought against the biggest two empires of that period, the Byzantines, Romans, and Persians of Iran. Feared his speed and technique in cavalier swordsmanship, and his unique battle strategy, which sent shivers down the spine to all garrison of the non-Muslim army. Heraclius, one of the greatest leaders of the Byzantine Christian Romans, stood by the window with one hand on the wall gazing down at the city. He stared at the morning bustle in the streets of Constantinople, but he wasn't interested in the life below. He was lost in thought, disturbed by the reports he just received: a Roman legion defeated by desert nomads. The engagement at the oasis of Dasin, just outside of Gaza, was a minor skirmish, but the Muslim victory sent a shockwave all the way up to Constantinople. To Heraclius, the Arabs were a backward people living in a desert wasteland. The Arabs, he knew, were an unsophisticated lot in constant conflict with each other, just barely eking out an existence under the unforgiving desert sun. The Arabs were not a military threat, let alone a military power. They were just a thorn in his side. But united for the first time under the banner of Islam, the Arabs unleashed a gale force wind that would sweep across the Middle East and blow as far east as China and west across North Africa. Heraclius wrapped his arms behind his back, and staring down at the cobblestone floor, he pulled away from the window and trudged his way back towards his chamber. He entered his dimly lit room as his mind raced back 4 years earlier. The citizenry showered him with honor as he rode through the streets of Constantinople in triumph after defeating the Persians and restoring the empire's splendor. It was a glorious time. He clenched his teeth and grimaced. Now was the time to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But he did not expect this from the Arabs. 4 Muslim divisions marched through the Holy Lands and swept across Jordan, Palestine, up the Mediterranean coast, and penetrated as far north as Emesa. When Emesa was still under siege, Heraclius, the Byzantine emperor, made another bid to muster strength and drive away the Muslims from the land of Syria. This time he planned action on a massive scale. A Byzantine army of 150,000 men had been put in arms and concentrated at Antioch. At this time, the Muslims were operating in 4 pockets. Amr ibn al-As was operating with his corps in Palestine. Shurabil was in Jordan. Yazid was in Caesarea, while Abu Ubaidah and Khalid were at Emesa. The plan of the Byzantines was that one Byzantine force was to march from Damascus from the west and cut off the Muslim force at Emesa. Another force was to attack the Muslims at Emesa from the north. One force was to attack Emesa from the east and still another from the west. The plan was to recapture Emesa and Damascus. When the Muslims came to know of the Byzantine plan, they held a council of war. The Muslims decided that instead of being divided into 4 pockets, they should consolidate their forces at one point and face the Byzantines as a united force. When the Byzantine force reached Emesa, they found that the Muslims had left. They found that Damascus had also been evacuated. The Byzantines marched to the south and reached the Yarmouk Valley sometime in the 3rd week of July 636. Here they settled down in camps and began their preparations for a confrontation with the Muslims. The Byzantine camp was 18 miles long, and between the Byzantine camp and the Muslim camp lay the central parts of the plain of Yarmouk. The Byzantine forces comprised of 200,000 men fully equipped. The Muslim army consisted of 40,000 men. Against every 5 Byzantine soldiers, there was only 1 Muslim soldier. When the Byzantine generals surveyed their army, they felt sure of their victory. The Muslims were fired with their faith and hoped that Allah would grant them victory in spite of the odds against them. Abu Ubaidah felt that it was going to be a tough battle. He thought that at that critical stage, it was necessary to avail of the military skill of Khalid. Abu Ubaidah accordingly decided to remain the nominal commander-in-chief. He delegated his powers of field operations to Khalid Ibn Al Walid. For some time, there were negotiations between the 2 parties. The Byzantines offered to pay the Muslims some money in case they left Syria and returned to Arabia. The Muslims spurned the offer. In return, the Muslims offered the Byzantines the usual 3 alternatives: Islam, jizya, or the sword. After the failure of negotiations, the arbitration was left to the sword. The battle began in the 3rd week of August 636. Both the armies faced each other across the plain of Yarmouk, about a mile apart. Before the 2 armies clashed, a Byzantine general, George, emerged from the Byzantine center and rode towards the Muslims. Halting a short distance from the Muslim center, he raised his voice and asked for Khalid ibn Walid. From the Muslim side, Khalid rode out, delighted at the thought that the battle would begin with himself fighting a duel. As Khalid drew near, the Roman made no move to draw his sword, but continued to look intently at Khalid until the necks of the horses crossed. And still, George did not draw his sword. Then he spoke in Arabic. "O Khalid, tell me the truth, and do not deceive me. For the free do not lie, and the noble do not deceive. Is it true that Allah sent a sword from heaven to your Prophet, and that he gave it to you, and that never have you drawn it, but your enemies have been defeated?" "No," replied Khalid. "Then why are you known as the sword of Allah?" Here, Khalid told George the story of how he received the title of Sword of Allah from the Prophet ﷺ. George pondered this a while. Then with a pensive look in his eyes, he asked, Tell me, what do you call me to? To bear witness, Khalid replied, that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his slave and messenger, and to believe in what he has brought from Allah. If I do not agree, then pay the jizya, and you shall be under our protection. If I still do not agree, then the sword. George considered the words of Khalid just for a few moments, then asked, what is the position of one who enters your faith today? In our faith, there is only one position. All are equal. Then I accept your faith. To the astonishment of the two armies, which knew nothing of what had passed between the two generals, Khalid turned his horse and rode slowly with the Roman to the Muslim army. On arrival at the Muslim center, George repeated after Khalid, there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. The commander-in-chief of the Byzantine force felt much annoyed at the walkover of his general George to the Muslim camp. He vowed vengeance against the Muslims as well as George. In a fit of fury, he chose a few selected warriors from the Byzantine side, and they challenged the Muslims to duel. Scores of duels were fought on the plain of Yarmouk. Practically, all the Byzantine champions were slayed on the combat. On the Muslim side, honors went to Abdul Rahman, the son of Abu Bakr, who slew 5 Byzantine champions one after the other. After the dueling was over, Mahan, the commander-in-chief of the Byzantine forces, asked his forces to launch the assault. Khalid Ibn Al Walid arranged his numerically inferior army in a large number of small units in order to make it look bigger, and thus fool the Byzantines. For the first 4 days of the battle, the Byzantines took the offensive, but the Muslims, though very hard pressed at times, refused to break. At one point on day 2, the Muslim left flank almost fell apart, but soldiers retreated towards their camp and countered their women, who were in the battle, to encourage the men to fight. They promptly returned to the battlefield and managed to hold out long enough for Khalid to shift troops around to support them. On the 4th day, Khalid attacked the Byzantines from 2 sides. The Byzantines broke under the blows of the Muslim cavalry and fell back to their original position, losing heavily in the process. The Byzantine archers now let loose a rain of arrows on the Muslim forces. Over 700 Muslims were hit in their eyes. Because of these arrows came to be known as the Day of Lost Eyes. That was the worst day of the battle for the Muslims. Seeing the concentration in Muslim ranks, the Byzantines increased their pressure. Even the corps of Abu Ubaidah and Yazid were pushed back. At this critical hour, Ikrimah and his contingent refused to retreat. They took the oath of death and fell upon the Byzantines with the fury and violence of desperate men. Under their blows, the Byzantines pulled back. Of the 400 dedicated men who took the oath of death, almost all, including Ikrimah, died, but they saved the day for the Muslims. Seeing the plight of the Muslim women rushed forward with tent poles to fight against the Byzantines. That inspired the Muslims to heroic effort. And when the day's action was over,
Wow. So the Muslim woman also took part in this battle. Subhanallah.
both the armies stood once again on their original lines. On the 5th day, an emissary came forward from the Byzantine side, proposing a truce for the next few days, so that fresh negotiations could be held. The Muslims did not accept the proposal. They said that they were in a hurry to finish the business. That day, there was no battle. By the afternoon on the 6th day, only a third of the Byzantine army remained in the battlefield. The rest had fled away. In the meantime, a storm began to blow. It blew against the faces of the Byzantines and provided a greater momentum to the Muslims to rush forward. In the confusion that followed, the Byzantines lost their bearings. Panic-stricken, they fled, and the pursuing Muslims slew thousands of Byzantines left and right. Khalid amassed his entire cavalry for an offensive. This was the decisive stroke. First, they chased off the Byzantine cavalry. Then they got around the Byzantine left flank and attacked the infantry from the rear. So it was here where the Byzantine line of retreat was complicated by rivers and mountains, and it was a relatively simple matter for the Muslim cavalry to cut off the easiest paths of retreat to the north. It's estimated that about half the Byzantine army wound up dying, and there are reports of men falling off of cliffs and drowning in rivers in panic flight. It was a crushing victory. The Battle of Yarmouk was the greatest battle that the Muslims had fought so far, that spelled the end of the Byzantine rule in Syria and ushered in the Muslim rule.
Yes, the Muslim rule, subhanallah. Wow. Wow. That was a nice, quick little story. I think, inshallah, I'm going to have the longer version here on my channel, but I wanted to go ahead and get like a brief introduction, if you will. But alhamdulillah, very good video. What was very inspiring was just hearing about the woman that joined the battle, and that consequently inspired the men. If it's one thing women can do, it is inspire men, you know, to fight and to push, to keep on. And that sounded like that's what the woman did in this story at the Battle of Yarmouk. And inshallah, I would love to actually hear about that, like all about that, the woman participating. And I think that the three usual options that the narrator gave, that Khalid Ibn Al Walid gave the other general of the Byzantine Empire, is like the Islam. You choose Islam, jizya, or the sword. I think that is that is so cool. And then jizya, honestly, I'm gonna look it up because I don't even know what jizya means, to be honest. So let's do a little research. Oh, what am I typing? Oh. Jizya is a tax historically levied on dhimmis, that is, protected non-Muslim subjects of a state governed by Islamic law. When the Quran was written, it was common inside and outside of Arabia to levy poll taxes against alien groups. Okay, very interesting, very interesting. Yeah, subhanallah, that was a very enlightening video. Inshallah, like I said, I will actually have the longer version on here very soon. I think the next video I'm going to do, or the one that's following this one, will be about Ramadan. And of course, I hope that everyone's Ramadan is going good. May Allah bless us in striving to attain His mercy and His pleasure. Making dua to Allah for a month full of mercy, a month full of peace and recitation of the Quran, and just supporting and loving one another and doing all that we can to make those good deeds that will pile up on our scale on Judgment Day, inshallah. Please, 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 if there are any other battles or any other things that took place in building and developing and spreading Islam, videos on Islamic history that you would like to see me react to, please go ahead and leave them in the comments below so I can get to them as soon as possible, inshallah. Thank you so much for being here. I love you all for the sake of Allah, and I will see you in the next one. Asalaamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.